In today's show, Anfernee Simons is elite. Damian Lillard is elite. Trendon Watford is elite. We're diving into the advanced stats to find out which skills are elite on the Blazers roster. Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You are listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts. Thanks for making this podcast your first listen every day, available 5 days a week, free on all platforms, so make it a part of your daily routine and make it your first listen every day. Today's episode brought to you by Bet Online. More props, more lines, more odds than ever before, so check out betonline.net. We got a fun show for you today. This is Monday, May 2nd's show. We made it to May. I don't know how we got here, but we are 2 weeks away from the NBA draft lottery, sort of the next big event in the Blazers offseason. So as we push forward towards that event, it's time to dive deep into the numbers because we're officially in the sort of the doldrums of the NBA offseason, before the true player movement happens, while you're just kind of waiting for that second round of the playoffs to wrap up. Once we get to the conference finals, then the rest of the teams kick into gear, moving into offseason mode. So as we kind of wait around, the Blazers are sort of stuck in no man's land. What better time than to dive deep into the stats? If you're a longtime listener of this program, you know that I'm kind of a stats guy. I'm not a big spreadsheet person or like a pencil pusher, but by big stats guy, I mean that I think the numbers help us learn more about the game. Like I think that you can, after you watch it with your eyeballs, checking back with what you saw and seeing if what you saw lines up with what the numbers say can help you learn more about stuff. So I want to lean into the numbers today. And this is actually an idea that was first pitched to me probably 2 years ago, maybe a little longer, maybe closing in on 3 years ago, early days of me hosting this podcast, when a listener, Reverend Dr. Beals, the good Reverend Doctor, said, how many elite skills do the Blazers have on the roster? And at the time, I kept calling Enes Kanter an elite offensive rebounder, which he was. He was truly an elite offensive rebounder. But what the Reverend Doctor asked is like, how many other elite skills are on the roster? And so now, 3 years later, with the Blazers with a totally different and somewhat, at this point, depleted roster, let's look into what those elite skills are and what they tell us about this group, and then heading forward, what that means. Anfernee Simons is elite. Like you saw him as looking like one of the best offensive players in the game. But what does that look like? What are his actual skills that are elite? And first, let's look, quick caveat. The number I chose as a cutoff was like 93rd percentile and above. We're looking for these numbers because 7% of the league is about 30 dudes. It's like 31 and a half if you include two-way players. It's about one per team. The top 7% in the league is about one guy per team, like on average. Obviously, some teams stack more elite players, hence they're still playing in the playoffs, and the Blazers at home, and we are scrounging the deep data fields for content. So I'm looking for skills where guys are in the 93rd percentile and above, and I use two sources. I use NBA.com's pretty rich tracking data put together by Second Spectrum. I don't love the tracking data, but I think it's an interesting thing to consider. Like I don't think every play is tracked correctly. I don't think every spot up is exactly a spot up, because if you put the ball down, were you still a spot up shooter, or is that now a spot up off the dribble if you took one side step? Like I don't know exactly how it gets tracked, but I think it gives us sort of a ballpark, pool pond, to use a phrase that I've stolen from someone else. So what are the elite skills? Anfernee Simons is elite, but what if I told you that he is in the 95th, almost 96, 95.5 percentile for spot up shooting, averaging 1.27 points per possession on spot ups. About 21% of his possessions used last year were spot up chances. Now, this matters to me more looking forward than it does looking back. Second half of last season, January and February, before they shut Ant down, he had the ball in his hands, and we'll talk about that in a second, but he had the ball in his hands a bunch. You just have less spot up opportunities when you're the point guard, because you're going to initiate a bunch of stuff, and then the ball would have to come back to you. Superstars score off the dribble, and Ant is good at that, right? He's a good pull-up shooter. Not elite, according to the numbers, but very good, like 80 plus percentile. One of the very good players in the league at it, for sure. But we're talking elite, best of the best. he's an elite spot-up shooter, and I think that matters because playing next to Damian Lillard, being a spot-up shooter is so valuable. If you have Ant's combination of off-the-bounce juice and some pull-up shooting and some gravity, scary with the ball, and you're an elite spot-up shooter, that's going to matter. Last season, according to NBA.com, Ant was an elite spot-up shooter. He was also, and this is really interesting to me and really important for me going forward, an elite cutter, according to NBA.com. Averaged 1.55 points per possession. That's good enough for a 93rd percentile, 93.2 percentile. Only 1.2% of Ant's possessions were cuts. He basically doesn't cut. It was one thing that I identified last year was like, even if his ball handling doesn't improve, he can become like better at getting to the rim just by becoming a better cutter. Cutting is a skill. Like it's hard to learn. Particularly for a guy like Ant, who's, always been, like, for the most part, been a guy with the ball in his hands, like in the early stages of his sort of developmental arc, and then was mostly just a spot-up guy for the Stotts teams because they stopped moving more than the early Stotts teams, which moved a boatload. But they were really stagnant, like not a lot of player movement in the late Terry Stotts era teams by any means. And honestly, not too much more with the Chauncey teams, a little bit different because the way the offenses worked, but they weren't crazy cutters. If Ant is really this good at cutting, and obviously if he's 1.2% of his possession, something he barely does in games, so this is tiny little sample size, talking 1 year of data in a weird year, but Ant as a cutter, being a good cutter, a guy who can get into space quickly and find a spot, to me that matters. He was, by the numbers, the best scoring cutter on the team last year. He can be a force, like he can be a lob guy. Blazers aren't a really good lob team, but Ant can be a lob guy. He can be that. And then you get to the ball in his hands. According to NBA.com's data, neither Anfernee Simons or Damian Lillard are elite ball handlers. But the good folks at bball-index.com, it's a subscription-based stats website. Really, really interesting. I find it super fascinating. That's bball-index.com if you want to check it out. They have a pick-and-roll ball handler stat. And according to their pick-and-roll ball handler stat, Damian Lillard is in 93rd percentile, and Anfernee Simons is in the 99th percentile. These are skills that matter because this is what the offense is going to look like. Even if it's slightly less pick and rolls than sort of the Stotts era, end of the Stotts era, because at the beginning of the Stotts era, again, the offense looked a little differently, kind of developed into Damian Lillard's preferences, and then they couldn't get away from him. If they're going to be a heavy pick and roll team, having two elite guards off the pick and roll stuff really matters. And according to the B-Ball Index, Dame and Ant both among the NBA's elites in terms of points per possession scored in pick and roll opportunities. Ant at 1.01 and Dame at 0.93. That's not these like hyper efficient plays. NBA.com stats that track something similar do not give them that as they're not that generous with the numbers and they're not that generous with the frequency. Again, I'm not exactly sure the difference in the way these two things are calculated, but it strikes me that if you have two elite pick and roll ball handlers and the guy who's going to play off the ball a little bit more is an elite cutter and an elite spot up shooter, the Blazers have a little something. The rest of it's going to matter. The defense is going to matter. The Blazers don't have many elite skills, none by my math, elite skills on defense. They need to get better there. But if their baseline is two of the best pick and roll ball handlers in the league and a guy who grades out as one of the best spot up shooters in the NBA and a great cutter who's also an elite ball handler, they've got something cooking. What did the Blazers have? Like two elite guards. That's what they had in the past. And it was a baseline for being decent. I think they have that again. Like day one, if Ant's going to resign, I expect that to happen. I expect him to be, Damon's him to be the starting backcourt in day one to begin next season. They've got two elite ball handlers, two elite pick and roll creators, and Ant, who grades out as someone who could be pretty darn good off the ball. If the cutting continues to grow, and he still is one of the best spot-up shooters in the game, 96 percentile, 95.5, if he's still one of the best spot-up shooters in the game, the Blazers already have a dangerous two-headed attack if they start right there. But the thing is, they've got other players. So you might be asking, what about the other dudes? What about like Nurk and Nas? Let's talk about it, because Nurk and Nas also have some true elite skills. That's what we'll talk about in the second segment, is some role players complementing the Blazers' two elite guards. Jusuf Nurkic and Nassir Little. What do they bring to the table that's truly elite? Before we do that, to tell you about Bet Online one more time. The fastest, easiest way to bet on all your sports action. They got more lines, more props, more odds than ever before. NBA playoffs are rolling along. We're into the second round. There's games every day. It's my favorite time of year. There's 8 teams left in the NBA. They're all very good, and we've still got basketball games every single night of the week. So you can go to Bet Online, get in on all of that action with, like I said, props and lines and odds on every single game. If you don't want to bet on the NBA, you can bet on whatever sport you want. You can even hang out and play your favorite Vegas casino games right there on the website. So go take advantage today. That's Bet Online, where the game starts. All right. So we talked about Dame and Ant. They're elite, and you can see it. That stuff is obvious. You can see it. There's some other stuff, some other elite skills on the Blazers team. We're not talking faults. I'm good at faults. We'll talk faults in a later episode. Now we're just talking about what they're great at. You know what Jusuf Nurkic is great at? He's a darn good roll man. He's a darn good roll man. I think I've said in the past on this podcast, I know I've said in the past on this podcast, that I think most of the pick and roll magic is Damian Lillard and Nurk gets to play with Dame, so he looks like a pick and roll maestro, but it's undeniable that Ant and Nurk were a really good pick and roll duo, and that Nurk was set better. I think he set the best screens of his career this year, got better at it, was a little more patient in the second half of the season as a roll man. Like, if you're good at it, you can be great at it with two guys who are really good. And if you have, and Nurk has the art of it down. In fact, according to bballindex.com, Jusuf Nurkic ranks 95th percentile in their roll gravity metric. So that's how much, when you roll, how much do you pull in, how much attention do you command? Jusuf Nurkic, 95th percentile in roll gravity. To me, that matters because the Blazers are going to see stuff that we're familiar with. Dame's going to come off a high pick and roll. They're going to send 2 to the ball. They want to get a ball out of his hands because anybody else. And then Nurk gets it in the middle as a guy who can be scary and spray out. And if you have that elite spot up shooter of Anfernee Simons on the opposite wing, or a budding cutter, Anfernee Simons cutting into the paint, Nurk's decision-making matters. And if he has real gravity on the roll, meaning that he pulls the attention of defenders, that only helps. Nurk, 95th percentile in B-Ball Index's roll gravity metric. He also ranks in the 93rd percentile in pick and roll man points per possession, the 93rd percentile, 1.17 points per possession. So that's like a 117 offensive rating. That's how points per possession work. Is offensive rating is normalized to 100 possessions. But like Nurk's really been really good at it. I will say this to be clear: the NBA.com stats are not nearly as friendly to grading Nurk as a roller. Not nearly as friendly. I'm not familiar enough to know how it works, and I think this is like kind of the value of advanced stats is like you don't just pick the one that looks good. For our purposes, I kind of am picking the one that looks good, but I want to be clear. Not every metric says that Nurk is this elite of the elite. They merely say he's pretty good as a roll man. Like he's decent as a roll man. The numbers say he's bad as a post-up guy. So like as a pick and roll guy, that's where you want him to make the decision. But B-Ball Index has a bunch of these tracking stats and has a bunch of these sort of player archetypes. And Nurk ranks extremely high in both roll gravity and points per possession as a roll man. And if you're good as points per possession as a roll man, it just figures you're also going to have elite roll gravity because you're scary as a pick and roll partner. I think you're starting to see the bones of what the Blazers look like. 2 elite pick and roll ball handlers, a very good elite, I'll use the word elite, roll man in the middle. You're running pick and rolls with Nurk, either Ant or Dame. You've got something. Like that is going to be a dangerous, it's going to be a high frequency play, and it's going to be a high efficiency play. The Blazers have an elite pick and roll attack right now. No matter what they do this summer, if all 3 of those gentlemen are back, they've got an elite pick and roll attack. Just start there and then figure out the rest. You know who else is elite and going to play a bunch this year is Nassir Little. And where Nassir Little ranks as an elite player is as a off-screen scorer. He is a really good offensive rebounder. And if you tweak the metrics enough for like guys under 6'5", the blah, 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 Nas does grade out as an elite offensive rebounder. I want to be clear about that. For someone his size, he's about as good as they come. But in terms of like grading Nas versus everyone who grabs offensive rebounds in the league, he's not an elite offensive rebounder. He's an elite offensive rebounder for someone who's listed at 6'5", and he's really, really good at it. But for my purposes, I wasn't trying to adjust the sliders around, because you can always kind of adjust the sliders. I'm just looking relative to the rest of the league. What are you elite at? And what Nas is elite at is scoring off screens. And to me, this is really, really interesting. 1.53 points per possession, 98.6 percentile off screens. That's he uses his plays end as off-screen plays 3.8% of the time. Frequency is about 3.8%. So this isn't like every time he runs off a screen. This is every time he runs off a screen and like gets a shot off or creates turnover. It's like his usage level. It's not every screen he's ever used at that level, but every screen where Nas gets the ball, basically, when he's coming off a screen. And to me, this is interesting because I think you can see this with your eyeballs. When Nassir Little has his feet set, he is a really good shooter. And when Nassir Little gets a downhill, like a straight line drive to the rim, he is an elite athlete. Those are two things you can get done off screens. You come off a screen, you get a little bit of space, get your feet set to shoot it, you're ready to go. Nas isn't running like a bunch of baseline screens like Ray Allen or Klay Thompson, but like he's someone that if he gets, he's athletic and he can get loose, and he's particularly when he's playing like power forward, he's running away from guys that he's just straight faster than. And if he comes off a screen and gets his feet set, he has shown that he can be a really good shooter. If he has to dribble, like if he puts the ball on the floor, he's way worse. Like this checks out with your eyeballs. You've watched this exact experience with Nas in the past. And if he comes off a screen and has a lane to the rim, you better look out, because he is going to put you on a poster. This checks out with me, and this is a role player skill. Like he's 98.6 percentile, obviously like really low frequency. So if he did this more often, he probably wouldn't be scoring 1.5 points per possession. That's a wild number, and a wild number obviously boosted up by the sort of just infrequency in which he did it. The small sample in general, but this is role player stuff. Like this is what you want. If you're going to play within this offense, like as we start to build this whole thing, what does the offense look like? A bunch of pick and rolls with Ant, a bunch of pick and rolls with Dame, Nurk as your roller, and then the other guys. Like Nas obviously has to improve as a spot up shooter. He also has proved he needs to get a little bit better as a cutter, and he needs to tighten up his handle so he can make some decisions when the ball comes to him late. But if the Blazers peak, Damian and Ant are like their best version of themselves. Damian and Ant are on the floor, Nurk is on the floor, and they're running what they do best, which are pick and rolls with the two guards and having Ant spot up and being elite at that. And then you've got this other elite skill on the backside, is that if Nas comes off a screen, he's really darn good at finding those spots. I think we've seen it, and the numbers suggest the same thing. The numbers are probably more generous than our eyeballs are, but that's just sometimes how it works. Those are elite skills. And that's an elite skill that is going to be valuable as a role player. So Nas is elite coming off screens. All right, I got a couple surprising ones to end the show. What if I told you Trent Watford was elite on offense? Well, some of you might be a little disappointed that he didn't get more of it, and some of you would say you're lying. But I'll give you the numbers in the third segment to close out the show. Before we do that, I want to tell you about Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar that there is. My personal favorite protein bar that I've ever tried. I've been eating Built Bars like they're a normal part of my week. I've been eating Built Bars for over 2 years. My personal favorite is peanut butter brownie. That is what I'm rolling with. But if that's not what you're into, you're gonna find something you like, because they got a whole bunch of flavors plus limited time options. So you can go to built.com and check out what they got for a short time and what they always have. You'll find something you like. You can order more from there. But the real trick of Built Bars is that they pack a bunch. 17 grams of protein, 130 to 180 calories, just 4 grams of net carbs on average, and 4 grams of sugar on average. All tasty, all healthy. Go get yourself some. Go to Built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15. You get 15% off your next order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Still a pass first point guard. Still Mike Richmond. You are still listening to Locked On Blazers. We're still talking about elite skills. Elite skills. As we think about the sort of the Blazers roster moving forward, we've got a sense of what they do best. So then it matters what the role players do best. But you know what? Here's a funny one for you. Josh Hart wasn't used as a role player when he played for the Blazers, because by the time he was healthy, the team he was their number 2 guy. Like he was their number 2 offensive option. And he was awesome. Josh Hart only played 13 games in Portland. He was great in those 13 games. Like the numbers are just they're above and beyond what he could be, which you either read as, or above and beyond what he's been, which you either read as, damn, Josh Hart's going to be good, or you read as like, wow, Josh Hart had a wild month with the Blazers before he stopped playing. And he'll probably come back to earth at some time. He's probably somewhere in the middle, like he'd probably just like an expanded role. Josh Hart could do more. He was already having his best season of his career in New Orleans. It continued in Portland. Like, that might just be, Josh Hart might just be sort of growing into more than what he was. But I think like the role for Hart was specifically not informative because he's not going to be the number 2 guy. He's going to be like the 4th guy on offense, and he's going to be like a role player. But when he was the guy, he was straight up elite at it in ISO scoring. So like, give me the ball on the left wing and let me go to work style of Josh Hart. 1.2 points per possession, 96.5th percentile. Only used, 6% of his possession, 6.5% of his possession, 6.4 if you want to get into the nitty gritty in my notes. But 6.5% of his possessions. He didn't use a bunch, but he was great at it. Like, he was great at it. B-ball index also has an isolation scoring, and Josh Hart grades out in the 100th percentile. In their isolation scoring. He was just a monster. And B-ball indexing, I'm just looking for the numbers I shared with you, that 1.2 is just those 13 games with the Blazers. But B-ball index is talking about in New Orleans, in Portland, all year long for Josh Hart, top 100th percentile as an ISO scorer. He was just really good at it. That it's not ideal, I think, because like the ideal skill to sort of like match next to Damian Lillard would be like elite shooting and like pretty darn good passing and a great defense. Josh Hart doesn't grade out as an elite defender. He doesn't grade out as an elite passer, although he took real strides there. He doesn't grade out as an elite spot up shooter, although he shot the dang cover off the ball in Portland. Like, he was great at it. But the ISO scoring matters because when stuff breaks down, the Blazers are going to need individual offense from someone that isn't named Dame. Anfernee Simons grades out really poorly as an ISO scorer. I think that I would be curious to see if that trend continues. Does Ant need a screen to get loose? I think is like kind of the measure there. Josh Hart, from the metrics, does not need a screen to get loose. Like, he's great downhill, right? Like, you see his strength. If he gets his shoulders past you, he's really good. He's really good in transition. But he grade out as an elite ISO scorer, and I think that can matter going forward because play breaks down, ball swings to Josh Hart, late clock, 6 seconds left. Okay, we need a bucket, darn it. And Josh has got it. Okay, well, he's an elite ISO scorer. He can really do this. We'll see if that trend continues, but I think there is some actual value in Josh looking like an elite scorer, elite ISO scorer, can only be read as a positive. And 96, almost 97th, 96.5 percentile, that's elite. You know who else is elite as an ISO scorer is Trendon Watford. And this is the number that kind of prompted this whole episode. I've had this show idea in my notes for a long time. The Reverend Dr. Beals is a wonderful longtime listener and someone who's helped me build the show by saying, hey, talk about this. It's lockedonblazerspod@gmail.com is the best place to send that feedback. I will learn from it. I promise I will. I've been doing it long enough that I trust you, dear listener. So I'm like, hey, let's find some interesting elite skills. And this one just jumps off the page. Trendon Watford. 93.7th percentile, 94th percentile as an isolation scorer, 1.13 points per possession, 4.2% of his plays, 4.2% frequency. That's courtesy of NBA.com. He does not grade out nearly as well on B-ball index, so he's like a middle, above average ISO scorer merely, but according to NBA.com, elite, and that's what we're looking for. Top 7% in the league, elite, not just good, not in the top 20%, top 25%, elite. And then Trendon Watford, according to NBA.com, is an elite ISO scorer. And before you say, okay, this doesn't make any sense and turn off the pod, first of all, you've already made it 23 or so minutes into the pod. Stick with me. It's a ton of fun. But this, to me, this is kind of what we saw from Trendon. Not that I would expect him to be elite. That jumps off the page. But yes, he was his best offense was probably in this situation because the two ways he would score best is if he was playing small ball 5 and he got a big traditional center on him and he could just he uses quicks to get past him. He's not an explosive athlete, but he's got a quick first step and he's good in floater range. So if he gets a little bit of space, he scores in that floater range. That's those weird in between shots are like where ISO scorers are going to thrive. They're going to have to make difficult shots, and Trendon's float game really is what his best offensive skill is by significant margin. But he was also good at bullying little guys. Like if he got someone he was stronger than, and he is pretty strong, like he could get stronger for sure. And I think he will have to if he's going to play a bunch of small ball 5 in the future. And I do think he will. But like if he got a smaller guy on him, he could, kind of use his shoulders, use his width to be a bit of a bully. Like I think when I think about Trendon, and I'm trying to use both, like I watch the games very closely, and also I'm someone who believes in the numbers, and it's like, does this make sense? Because if it doesn't make sense in either direction, then you kind of got to either go back to the tape or dig in deeper to other numbers to kind of figure out where it is, right? Like you want these things to make sense intuitively, and then if they don't make sense intuitively, you want to figure out why. I think this makes sense intuitively. I think when we've seen Trendon be at his best as a scorer, it's because he's faster than the big guys and stronger than the little guys. When he meets someone roughly his size and a little bit stronger, he's had trouble scoring. He's not a great shooter. He doesn't have a ton of rim pressure and get all the way to the rim, but he's good at getting funky little shots off. He's good at saying, "Yup, I got a little bit of space, a little bit of crack. I got a crack, and I in the defense, and I scored." And he did it by punishing mismatches on either side of the spectrum, either too slow or not strong enough. And he's there. Do I think Trendon Watford is going to grade out as if he plays like real minutes, which who knows if he will next year? I think no. Like I think he won't be a big minutes guy, but he can be like not a big minutes guy, but like Trendon Watford could be a backup power forward in the league next year. I'm not. That seems reasonable to me. Could he be a backup power forward on like one of the teams that's still playing in the playoffs now? Probably not, but he could grow into that. So like, depending on what level of the Blazers team roster they end up with, like he might be a regular player from night one. I don't anticipate that, but he certainly could be. And part of the reason he will be is because of this offensive bag, because of this offensive creativity. He's got some elite skills. I don't think that grows with him. I'll track this all year as his ISO scoring. I think this is fascinating to kind of see that the numbers suggest that he's really good. At least some of the numbers suggest that he's really good there. Elite there, if we're using the E word. I think with more frequency and more attention and a different roster, it's not going to be like that. But I think I think your eyeballs suggest that yes, Trendon Watford does have a little bit of juice to get his own shot in certain situations. That's true. That's just real. So those are your elite skills. Ant and Dame, Naz and Nurk, Josh and Trendon. Those are your elite skills. Be wary of these numbers because they don't mean everything, but I think it's an interesting look at like what are the Blazers truly great at. And I think so much of this is like Dame would be up there higher on some of this stuff, but he wasn't himself last year. I went back and looked at his previous season, and he didn't blow the numbers away. Like he wasn't elite at anything that he wasn't just like sort of good at this year. It was mostly like, oh yeah, he's like 75th percentile. Last year he would have been 90th, but we're talking elite, that top 7% of the world. You think Dame's going to take steps forward? You think the rest of these guys can build on these skills that they already have or kind of grow them in different ways? Those are the Blazers' elite skills. Not many of them coming on the other side of the ball. Right now, they need some upgrades. We'll talk about some of their shortcomings in a future episode. But today, we're just talking elite stats, and that's what you need to know. Tomorrow's episode, we got some fake trades. I'm doing it. I'm braving the trade machine waters, and I'm going to give you 3 fake trade proposals to improve the Blazers team. So come back tomorrow. Here's some fake trades. Hear me. I am not Picasso on the trade machine, but I'm finger painting out there, and I'm gonna bring you the best that I got. So come back for that one. Come back for more episodes later this week. Trying to nail down a late week interview. So make sure you're checking back for that. 5 days a week, available wherever you get podcasts. Also on YouTube. Tell your friends to check it out. Appreciate you listening. Talk to you soon.